Welcome, everybody, to the Veil Between Lives, a sanctuary where lived experience meets the great mystery. Here we hold soulful conversations with those who have touched the unseen and what lies beyond the physical world. We're honored you're here stepping into this space with us. We're your hosts, Em and Susan. And our very, very special guest today, we're so honored to have her here, is Holly Holmes Meredith, a licensed psychotherapist, doctor of ministry, board certified clinical hypnotherapist, and Reiki master. As director of HCH Institute, she's trained and certified hypnotherapists for over 40 years, developing it into a landing pad for soul seekers and light workers, cultivating skills and transformation and awakening. She specializes in trauma and spiritual emergence, offering online services worldwide. And honestly, Holly, I can't thank you enough for being here. All three of us here today are all connected through your school. Both Em and I both trained at your school, and we are deeply grateful for the experiences and the awakenings that we had through being part of that experience with you. So grateful that you're here, and I would just love it if you would, share a little bit maybe about your backstory and kind of what set you on your spiritual path.
Thank you, Susan and Em. So delightful to be here with both of you. My path began at a very young age, growing up in a very dysfunctional alcoholic family. For my own solace, I turned within, and I realized there was something within me that I could depend on in the middle of the chaos that I experienced as a kid, and some physical abuse too that I had from my mom. And even as a child, I would ask my parents to take me to church, even though they didn't go to church, because I knew there was something in the experience of community and in the experience of prayer and meditation that was serving me even at a young age. So my path began pretty early. And by the time I was a teenager, I was immersed in psychology, philosophy, metaphysics, spirituality, reading as much as I could, not having any mentors at this point, not having any guidance other than my own inner guidance. But I did have an English teacher in high school that gave me an opportunity to read Waldorf's Waldorf Pond, Henry David Thoreau's book. And reading that book was my first big opening. It was my first awakening to a part of myself that I knew was eternal and a part of myself that I knew I had brought from other lifetimes. Because the information of the transcendental philosophy was like coming home. So that's where my path really took off and began, and when I went to college at Berkeley, UC Berkeley, I took classes in philosophy, psychology, and in English, and studied as much as I could through literature and philosophy and psychology about the awakening process, cosmic consciousness, and the understanding of our evolutionary path as humans. Even when I was at Berkeley in the '70s, it was not something that was really mainstream, but there were courses that I could take that were inklings of where we're headed with consciousness studies, and I was so excited and so delighted just to absorb every class I could take on it, and every paper that I wrote for my classes were always about consciousness. And then I thought, "How in heaven's name am I gonna take my passion into the world? What am I gonna do with this?" And because my opening had come through literature, I decided to become a high school teacher. And I did teach English for 10 years and psychology classes. And then I decided at that point that the teaching was really close to my heart, but in a school system, it was too limited for what I was really wanting to do. So I went back to school, became a psychotherapist at John F. Kennedy University, which is one of the few transpersonal counseling psychology programs. Got my degree there, and then became a marriage family therapist and quit teaching. About 2 weeks after I quit teaching, my hypnotherapy teacher, Dr. Frida Morris, who was the founder of the school that I now own, asked me to teach a hypnosis class for her, which I did. It was a class on pain management, and when I got home, there was a recording for me to call her, and I called her back. She said, "How would you like to have your own hypnosis school?" And I said, "Well, it's funny you should ask because 2 days before I taught for you, I started filling out forms with the state of California to open my own hypnotherapy school." So it was astonishing and so affirming that she was offering me her school. She was ready to retire and move on. And when I told her about that, the synchronicities, she laughed and said, "Well, I just want to tell you, I asked my higher self if you were the right person." She says, "I've been looking for 6 months for the right person for the school." She said, "I took myself into self hypnosis and I asked my body to be a pendulum." She said, "Moving to the right was yes. Moving to the left is no." She says, "Holly, my body hit the wall on the right side."
Mm.
She says, "I know you're the right person for the school." So that was the opening for me to find what became my true path, which is to support people in their own awakenings through the tool of hypnotherapy. But my work has expanded beyond hypnotherapy over the last 40 years as well, including energy therapy and working more with body-oriented therapies. So I'm working with clients as well as training hypnotherapists, and HCH has expanded exponentially over the 40 years. We have different certification programs now, including a shamanic practices training and an energy therapy training. And we have all kinds of opportunities for the public to come and have experiences one-on-one or to do group processes. And just being here with Susan just reminds me that she's part of our team. She works both as a hypnotherapy instructor and as a person who provides a meetup every month to do past life regression therapy.
Mhm.
So we have all kinds of activities for the public, for people who are looking for new careers. You mentioned earlier that it's a landing pad for light workers. It really is a landing pad. People who show up at HCH are wanting excellence in their training. They're wanting community of like-minded, like-hearted people, and they're wanting mentoring. And that's what we provide our students.
Mm. I have a
Yeah.
follow-up question, actually. How have you seen consciousness change in the 40 years you've been doing this? Like,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. Just to give you one example, when I started to do past life regression therapy, I was in my early 80s, and I would go into group experiences as a client, and about maybe 2/3 of the people in the group were having experiences. About a third of the people were not having any images or feelings or senses of what the past life was about. So it wasn't something that everybody could access originally. But because of the quantum field and the amount of people that have been doing the work and the amount of clients who've been partaking in the work, the quantum field has become saturated with the capacity to access so much easier. And so that's one area that I can say is absolutely a reflection of people's consciousness. But even more importantly for me, when I look at the quality of people that show up at my school and the consciousness that people are bringing as beginners into doing hypnotherapy into this work, blow my mind. People get it so much easier. They are so much more awake. They're so much more receptive. It's like there's been a tsunami effect of consciousness shifting since I've been in this field for over 40 years, and it is so hopeful to get the energy of what's happening right now in a very direct way, like I have the honor of experiencing.
Hey, Holly, would you be willing to share maybe a past life or two
Sure,
and maybe share or expand on how it maybe deepened your understanding of yourself
absolutely.
process?
Yeah, when you become a hypnotherapist or any kind of practitioner, one of the main necessities is to experience the work for yourself. So
Mm.
I've done a lot of my own past life work. Some of it's been one-on-one, some of it's been in groups, and a lot of it's just been on my own. My first experience, I was a hypnotee in my hypnotherapy training with Dr. Frida Morris. I volunteered, and my first experience was that of a dance hall girl in Northern California, but besides being a dance hall girl, I was a madam. I ran the whorehouse, and I had a bunch of women that I was supporting who were under me that, I was the boss and I was supporting these women. And the thing that was so amazing about this experience was we all held that our sexuality was healing. It was healing for people who were isolated, who were alone, who were lonely, and we saw it as a form of healing. Even though the public may not see it that way, we took it upon ourselves to consider ourselves really ministering to men who were so lonely and sad. So that was my first experience. Over the years, I've had many, but one that really stands out was when I was having a massage, and the massage therapist asked me what I was carrying that was so heavy on my back, and I said, "I think it's my mother." And when I said that, I flipped into a past life spontaneously. And I saw my mother, who had been physically abusive to me, as a small little child. I was the child's stepmother, and I was being ruthlessly mean and beating this little girl. And when I looked into the little girl's eyes, I knew it was the soul of my mother this lifetime. And that experience completely changed me because I realized that I had the capacity to be an abuser as my mother had. And I realized that of my three siblings, I was the one she was abusing because we had the past life connection around the abuse. And when I got that message and saw the clarity, I let go of so much of my anger and resentment to my mom and started to look at my own capacity to be in that position with other people. So it was a real awakening for me. And the beauty of that was not only that I was feeling more accepting of my mom and more forgiving and more loving towards my mom, but she, at that point, became sober for the first time in her life. And she ended up going through rehab. And in the community where we lived, she started halfway homes for people who were going through what she had gone through with her. Then she met a man through her programs that she married. He was a lovely, loving man who was also in recovery. And she and her husband put together these halfway houses for people to stay after they got out of rehab. And those programs are still going on today. So my mother had a healing from it, and I had a healing from it, and it gave me a very profound understanding of how past lives can affect us now. And that when we access the causal levels of the issues that we're dealing with and facing in this lifetime, that they do not always start with this current lifetime. So I became very, very excited and tuned into past life work from that moment on. And then I've had other lifetimes where I've been like in a tent out in the desert somewhere in the Middle East as a man who had an aunt that was a palm reader who taught me how to dupe people by reading their palms, how to take advantage of them. And synchronistically, when I had that experience of a past life, I'd been voraciously studying palmistry. I had two palmistry teachers. I have a book shelf this big of palmistry books. I was voraciously studying palmistry. And when I had that past life, my desire to read palms completely went away because I realized that my desire to study it was what needed to bring me back to that lifetime, to remember the lesson that integrity has to be the baseline of anything you're offering others. And it has to come from a place of empowerment, not taking power. So that's been a big theme in my life as well, is the whole concept of empowerment. And I'm really glad that lesson came up at an early time in my practice because there's so much opportunity to have these skills and tools and to misuse them. So one of the big soapboxes I get on when I teach is the whole concept of empowerment and how important that is. Stay in integrity with that. So not all the lives have been beautiful lives, they've been challenging lives and challenging lessons, but when I tune into them, I'm so grateful to remember those lessons because then I can remember this lifetime to apply what I've learned and to try to live in alignment with what my soul has been showing me and teaching me this lifetime through my past lives.
Beautiful.
Yeah, that story about how it healed the relationship with your mother is is beautiful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I still get teary when I think about it.
Yeah. It's incredible the experiences that we can have through these practices. It really is.
Yeah, we're so limited by our current consciousness, when we can expand it out of this 3D realm into other realms, we can see things from such new perspectives.
I wonder if you have any stories that you could share from things that you've witnessed, hypnotic techniques that you've used, and maybe how they have shifted the consciousness of a client or helped to basically reshape their lives through their awakening. Any of the processes that you use that you feel called to share about?
Well, there are many, many different templates that can be followed in hypnotherapy. There's a different process for inner child work than there is for intuition development or for habit control. And yet, even though the templates and the approaches might be different, the results are almost always the same. And the results primarily come to a client releasing whatever blockages were there, whether it's physical, mental, emotional, or beliefs, and coming back to someone's true self,
Mhm.
coming back to their authentic self with a bigger understanding and bigger knowing of why me. And in that, people often have a realization of how we are unconsciously perpetuating our limitations. So, hypnotherapy is a beautiful doorway through which people can move into releasing the limitations or the patterns or the beliefs that keep us stuck in these routines, most of which that don't serve us, and have the freedom to be more whole within oneself.
Mhm.
So, I work with just about any presenting issue, but it always goes back to that primary understanding of who we are intrinsically as humans having, these are spiritual beings having human experiences. And not everybody who does hypnotherapy has the approach I have. I have a psycho-spiritual approach, which goes beyond the traditional concept of the conscious and subconscious, or the unconscious, which is another term for that, by adding in another dimension of the higher consciousness. And the higher consciousness is that spiritual aspect of all of us that is the divine nature, that is the intrinsic blueprint through which we've been created from source.
Mhm.
And when we access that directly in a trance state, things change quickly. And one of my teachers that I've studied is a mystic named Sri Aurobindo. One of his books, he talks about what is now called transpersonal psychology. He talks about how traditional psychology is trying to help people who are stuck in the rut crawl out to the light, crawl out of the patterns. Psycho-spiritual therapies are different because they're bringing the light into those patterns in the darkness. So you're already resourced with that light as you do the healing and work. So from my experience being trained in traditional and transpersonal psychology, it's a much faster way, a much cleaner way to get to that empowered whole sense of self, because the light is already there. The light is within us. And my job is to help people access it.
Mhm.
And when they access that light within themselves, that wisdom, magic happens. Magic happens. And it's a state of grace. And I get to, in a very grateful way, I get to experience that almost on a daily basis with people, because the reality is these techniques really do work. And I tell my students that's the biggest secret about the training. When they're graduating, and I say, now the secret's out. This really works. And they're going, yep, I see that. I get it. I trust it, because they've had the experiences themselves to know from internally.
I think it's so important too that your school is structured on an experiential level for the people in the
Mhm.
training and not just here's some techniques, here's some scripts, and then here you go and off into the world, right? I think it's really important that we do our inner work if we are going to be holding space for others. I really appreciate that so much about the training that you offer. I think it's very different than a lot of the trainings out there. So
It's very different in that way. Many people train through scripts, and I've written a book on scripts. So I know that scripts give people a running start in how to learn the language patterns, how to learn the structure of a session, how to learn how to do hypnobabble, is what you say between the suggestions, as a model. But what I really am teaching my students is to be present with the client and to follow the client's process. And in my book, I talk about Taoist precepts as a spiritual template through which we can learn these tools of hypnotherapy, which is basically how to go with the flow, stay out of the way, trust the process, rely on the inner resources of nature, the beauty of nature, how nature teaches us, and the resources within us as our co-therapists when we're a client to support the unfolding. So I train people in techniques so they learn them, but I tell them you're going to follow the client, and what you may have learned as a technique may not be relevant for where the client goes with the process. So there's a tremendous amount of flexibility that needs to be learned and trust that needs to develop to let go of the structure and let it emerge in a very organic and authentic way as the therapy unfolds.
Mhm.
That's the art of it.
Yeah. And
It's
it's
the
so
art of
funny because it's like the opposite of how we're told that we should live our regular lives with all this structure, right? And it's like, forget all of that. When it comes to this, is like
well,
totally the opposite, right?
I think the students that are most challenged by my training are the ones that have been trained to be psychotherapists because that's not true for everybody, and that's not true for every type of psychotherapy, but there is so much more rigidity and boundaries that you have to have and guidelines that you're supposed to follow to be legal and ethical that there's a lot of inhibitions that, are going to come up because there's not a sense of that flow or that spontaneity. As a hypnotherapist, there's much less of that projection onto the therapist. They're projecting it onto their higher self as the source. So the hypnotherapist becomes really more a tour guide, not a therapist. The therapist is the inner workings of what the client's doing. That's the therapy. We're providing a structure, some space, some freedom to explore in that inner way.
Mhm. Beautiful.
Yeah. That's what I love about HCH. I really appreciated that. It's almost like being an artist, right? Like you have some guidelines, but really it's also about emptying the self and allowing yourself to said that guide, that just
Mhm.
like a tour guide. We can get the information and really just allow listening, and I love that. I love that. Very creative work.
I
It's
think,
really
I've been taking Tai Chi again, probably the fourth time in my life I'm back doing Tai Chi, and what I love about Tai Chi is that you learn to go with the flow of energy.
Mhm.
Technique called push hands, where you have a partner and you're paralleling each other, and one of you is gonna be a little bit more yang and one's gonna be more yin, and you have to learn how to accommodate the differences so that you can become that oneness. And that's exactly how I feel about doing hypnotherapy. We have to be adaptive and adjust in our language, in our tonality, in our tempo, in our frequency to be in alignment with the client so that we can join and create that bigger energy when two come together. And that's where the magic and artistry is, I think.
Mm.
And it's
Yeah,
different with every person.
yeah, and I think that's the key, right? It is an energy healing as well, and I loved the way that you put that in that it really is a flow.
Mhm.
It's a flow, and you really need to just drop everything and be very present for that process. Yeah.
And by doing so as a practitioner, we get tremendous benefits personally.
Mhm.
Because we are in that state of consciousness with our clients hour after hour, day after day, week after week, and it helps us come back to our true selves so that we can bring that ability that we have with the clients into our daily lives and more into our personal relationships. So literally, by doing this work, we are expanding our consciousness, literally, and we are expanding our intuitive ability
Right.
because we are in that energetic beyond time and space with people so much, we become very tuned into the intuitive world. It's just another benefit of doing the work as a practitioner.
Beautiful.
I wonder if you could talk a little bit about spiritual emergence versus spiritual emergency. I think you're like the expert on this. And I love hearing how you talk about it. So could you share that with us?
Well, the term spiritual emergence was coined by a psychiatrist named Stanislav Grof. probably in the late 70s. And Stan Grof is considered the father of modern transpersonal psychology. He is renowned for his research with LSD in the 70s and 80s, working with LSD to show that people who have the LSD experience have shifts in consciousness and healings. And his research was stopped because LSD became a controlled substance at one point. But he went on to work with a form of hypnosis that he calls psychotropic breath work, where he would have people listen to intense sound music and to do a certain breathing exercise, lying on the floor with someone sitting by their side to support them, that would put them into a non-ordinary state of consciousness, very much like hypnosis. It was totally non-directed. And in this state, with thousands and thousands of people that he facilitated these workshops with, people would go into different realms of experience of consciousness. For instance, they could go into the interlife between lives. They could go into the demonic level of consciousness. They could go into the dream world. They could go into where people go when they die. They could go into the angelic realm. They could go into that pre-birth state where you're in the utero. And he mapped out all these levels of consciousness. And then he discovered that when people had these experiences for the first time, that their daily paradigm and viewpoints would completely change and shift. That they realized they were more than this 3D reality and more than just their thoughts. That they were energetic, that they were multidimensional. And when people have an experience like this, they go into what's called a spiritual emergence. Their whole paradigm of life, of themselves, of spirituality, of what they thought they knew falls away as some new understanding starts to emerge. It's a spiritual opening and a spiritual awakening for people. And many, many people have had these experiences more and more all the time. When you were asking the question earlier, Susan, about do I see people having shifts? This is one of the things I see a lot now, is that people are having spiritual emergence experiences. And for some people, it's very disruptive because what's familiar and comfortable is no longer there for them, and they have to learn to adapt. And many people wonder if they're going crazy when they have their first experience of being more dimensional than just this body. So there has been a whole support network called the Spiritual Emergence Network that he created many years ago. I've been on that panel since I was just a new therapist in the 1980s. And people can go to these practitioners for help when they go through a spiritual emergence. And the primary help that they'll get is that it's a normal evolutionary state. We're all going to have these experiences at some point. To help midwife people through these openings is what the purpose of it. And occasionally, a spiritual emergence will become an emergency because the person is too overwhelmed to function. They are too bombarded with other energies that they don't feel safe. They may have an experience of other dimensional energies around them, like ghosts or angelic beings, or even spirits of dead people that are freaking them out. And their life is so disrupted that they can't function. That's a spiritual emergency. And unfortunately, a spiritual emergency can look like psychosis to anyone who is not trained to be able to diagnose states that people have mentally. So you have to be a licensed therapist to know how to diagnose. But most licensed therapists are not trained in spiritual emergence or transpersonal psychology. So unfortunately, many people who are having a spiritual emergence are hospitalized and medicated and considered that they have a mental disorder. And that is the antithesis of what needs to happen for someone who's having a spiritual emergency. They may need counsel to slow things down, to take a break, to stop any meditation practices or Tai Chi practices, to maybe eat more grounding foods, to do more deep resting, to get some psychotherapy to help them through the spiritual emergence, to help them come to a new homeostasis where they can integrate their experience and have some control over it so that they're not done in by being overstimulated or freaked out with these new states of consciousness that are happening. So, I have met many people who are in the mental health field who themselves have gone through a spiritual emergency, who've been treated with traditional practices, who have been really, really harmed because it stopped that evolutionary process that needed to be supported. So it's important that people understand what this is, and if they're having a spiritual type of experience, to go to someone who is trained in this. They can help them and diagnose whether they're having a psychotic break or they're having a spiritual emergency,
Mhm.
because they need to be handled differently in terms of support. So that's what that is. And for anyone who's interested in knowing more, there's the Spiritual Emergence Network, SEN, and they can find that online and read about Stan Grof's work and find practitioners that are providers of services for people with spiritual emergencies.
Thank you for providing that. That's
Yeah.
it's very important. Holly, I'm wondering if you might be able to touch on what are the differences, or are there differences between like a spiritual emergence and spiritual awakening, like becoming awakened or enlightened,
Um,
for example?
I think a spiritual emergence is part of that awakening, but it is not the end point. It is just a stepping stone towards that. And probably those of us who are committed to our spiritual openings are going to have many different stages of spiritual emergence, especially as we integrate one stage and normalize it and then go to the next level. We'll have little openings along the way. I don't profess to know what complete enlightenment is. I used to think I did, but the more I learn, the less I understand. And I also don't think that there's an endpoint to being enlightened. I think it's an ongoing process, and from what I've been learning and intuiting myself, I think it continues even when you're not in a physical body, that you continue to have different levels of consciousness that you will move through as you have learned and remembered the truth of who you are. And the concept that I think of as enlightenment is being completely free of projection, to realize that you are the divine creator of your own experience, to take full responsibility for your thoughts, words, and deeds, to realize that you are the creative force in your life, and that God part of you can be fully functional and awake and contributing to the evolution of all of us, because the quantum field, which connects us all, is being affected by everyone all the time. And one of the things that I so appreciate about my work and our community of practitioners and students and healers is that we are in alignment in that way. So we are fortified in our protection and in our work and in our resolve to move through our own stuff, to keep growing and expanding so that we can be more readily available as a spiritual guides and spiritual emergence support network for everybody else who's going through it. That like-minded, like-hearted energy is so supportive of all of us. This can be a very lonely path for people, and primarily because there's still such scrutiny out there about is this real. I mean, there's still people that don't believe that psychic phenomena is a real thing. It's true that some people don't think it's real. It's all a placebo effect. Until people have experiences, they don't know. And why should we know until we have our own experiences?
Mm.
But I think, when we can be around other people that have had similar experiences and that we can talk about our experiences openly, knowing that we won't be judged or considered wacko and crazy, is super helpful, super empowering, to give us an opportunity just to land into ourselves and just accept ourselves for where we are and to trust ourselves for where we are. That support is super helpful. And I truly think that of all the wonderful things that HCH supports in people, it's the community aspect of it that's the most healing. I hear over and over and over again from our community and our students that the best part of it was to finally get into an environment where they were free to be themselves.
Yeah. I remember the first day I walked into HCH and I said to myself, I'm home.
Yeah.
Susan, I hear that all the time. Now, I no longer have a facility after COVID. Things changed dramatically for me as the director and owner of the school because we couldn't meet in group.
Yeah.
All the restrictions we had in California for that. So we migrated to Zoom, which I had been doing Zoom sessions for years, but to teach on Zoom was a complete new thing. and I had a lot of biases against it, but I didn't feel like I had a choice.
Yeah.
But I have to tell you now, it's the best thing that's happened to me in my career because I have so much more flexibility. I can reach people that I could never reach before because of, Zoom being international. I've got a much, much more diverse population and part of our community because of that. And I get to be at home and have a personal life that I wasn't really having before that I'm really relishing. So it's been a really good change. And most of my students are quite happy being online.
Definitely allows for a much bigger, much wider population, right? You can do this, anybody in the world can really participate, and it's just as effective. It's really lovely, yeah.
Well, with the Zoom rooms, you have like your privacy in your little office on Zoom
Yeah.
so that you don't have to clamber over people or find out the space to me. I mean, it's just built in. And when I teach, I get to see everybody's reactions all at once.
Yeah.
When you're in a classroom, you've
Mhm.
got to do this. You've got to check on who's listening, who's falling asleep, who's got questions. But when I'm on Zoom, I get the download immediately from the expressions and body motions of all my students. So I feel in some ways more connected
Mhm.
Yeah.
and more responsive.
Yeah.
So I'm relishing that part of it as well, and we're in the quantum field more. We're in this no time, no space, and even with AI now, things are changing. We're moving into a whole new realm of learning and understanding and growing that I think is so appropriate online.
I definitely feel like the training um, online, it allows for you to be in your own environment too, right? Which has a tendency to allow you to go much deeper because you're comfortable and you're not concerned about, things on the outside. And yeah, I found that the times where I've done sessions online have been very, very insightful.
Yeah, and if you're at home, you can eat when you're hungry, use a
Yep.
bathroom when you need to. I mean, you've got the freedom of checking on your dog who needs to go outside. I mean, it's just so much more fluid and normalizing of being together with people
Yeah.
and not having a rigid formula or environment that you've got to adhere to.
Yeah.
So I'm quite delighted with it.
I have a juicy question. I wonder if you might touch a little bit on spirit releasement.
You bet.
Mm,
Yeah, it's such a
Okay.
juicy topic.
One of the juicy topics that people still scrutinize because
Yes.
not everybody believes that we have consciousness that is separate from our physical body. I have a very sweet friend who's in her 90s who is preparing for her last decade here. And we talk a lot about death and dying. And she has this very structured belief that when you die, you're gone, there's nothing there. And that's what she's expecting. And I keep teasing her and saying, well, if you go before I do, you have to come tell me what you discover. She kind of winks, but she doesn't believe in any of this stuff. And this is the first issue that's gonna come up with a client, if you have to be respectful of where a client is evolutionary and whether this is part of their paradigm or not. But sometimes people will have symptoms that can't be explained biologically. They can't be explained in the family system. They can't be explained in terms of their belief system. And it's inexplicable how they could possibly have these symptoms. And that to me is a sign that maybe it's not their symptoms. Here's an example. This was the first case I ever learned about in my first training to learn spirit releasement with William Baldwin, who's now deceased, but he was my teacher and mentor for years in learning this technique. And he did a demonstration at a past life conference teaching this class on spirit releasement. And he had a woman who was the hypnotee in front of the group. And her presenting issue was that she did not like alcohol. She was not a drinker. But every morning for the last 6 weeks at 2 a.m., she would wake up out of a deep sleep, go down to the kitchen, and get a belt of whiskey. Happened every night for weeks. And she says, "I don't like whiskey. I don't like drinking. I have no idea what's going on. I think I'm going frigging crazy." So what he did was under hypnosis, he invited the part that was waking her up and going down to the kitchen for a belt of whiskey to come forward and to talk to him. And what he discovered was that several weeks prior to this, she had gone to a party at a bar with some friends for a birthday. and she'd had a little bit too much to drink, which she normally never did, and she brought this Klingon home with her, and this Klingon was an alcoholic who had died in a car accident, and he was hanging out in the bar waiting for a chance to hitchhike, and because she had had a little bit too much to drink that night, which she normally hardly ever drank, he went home with her. And he'd wake her up in the middle of the night till she'd go down and have a bottle of whiskey so he could get his fix. And that entity was released in the process. And I never got a follow-up from the woman, but I pretty much assure you that she never got up at 2 in the morning and had another bottle of whiskey. So that's a pretty blatant example of how people can have energetic attachments, some of which are just hanging around. They might have a little influence here and there. And then there's a continuum of that where some of them completely take over, which would be like a full possession. Rarely does that ever happen. So the process of doing a spirit releasement is very loving and very empowering because you're doing therapy with the entity. You're finding out what the entity's needs are, what happened to them that they did not move on into the light when they passed. Sometimes it's simply that they're confused because they didn't think they're going to exist after they died, and there they are, they're still existing. Sometimes it's because they're addicted. Sometimes it's because they have regrets and remorse, and they're trying to deal with that with the people that they feel unfinished with. Sometimes they're just ornery. They just want to hang out. They don't want to go. For whatever reason, the spirit releasement process will address the needs of the entity by having them realize, number one, that they're dead. Sometimes they don't know they're dead. Number two, that there's a place where beings go after they pass, and all the near-death experience research has a map of that, if you're familiar with near-death experiences, and that you're going to help the entity remember what its life purpose was, what it was there to do, what it completed, and that it doesn't need to hang out now, that there's a place to go for its evolutionary purposes. And it's usually a piece of cake. They're very happy once they tune in to the reality of what's happened and what options they have. They're usually very willing to go. And sometimes it takes a little more work. It takes a little more help to get them squared away enough so that they're ready to let go of whatever they're holding on to. And there are other more advanced techniques that you would use for that. But the basic approach is that it's to help beings who have died, who have not moved on, get a ride back to the light.
Yeah.
And you do that by getting help from guides and helpers from the light who have the job to support these beings and ushering them home. Now, possession can happen in more ways than just a spirit of a dead person. There could be a live person that's possessing someone. That's what cult leaders do. They have mental control over people. So that would be another form of spirit releasement. Or it could be a non-human entity like an extraterrestrial, or maybe a nature spirit that might be there, like a fairy or gnome or elf. So there's a whole variety of approaches that you would learn as a spirit releaser depending on who's on first, who's there.
Yeah.
And the process is one of gently, lovingly uncovering and supporting and giving them an opportunity to make a choice, because it's all free will. It's all free will. Has nothing to do with exorcisms, what I'm talking about. Nothing to do with that, which is an antithesis of what spirit releasement is.
Yeah.
And it's actually quite common.
Yeah.
It's quite common. And they can come and go. They have to have some opening to come in, like an accident or a high fever or drinking too much or having a fight with your spouse. Something that disrupts your energy system creates an opening so that there's an opening for them to attach. And just as an opening to come in, they need an opening to go out. And that's what spirit releasement provides, is an opening to move on.
A great explanation. I love listening to you. What happens?
I know.
What happens? Can you just touch real quick on what happens when there's more than one attachment?
Well, the spirit releasement process begins by listening for what the client's presenting issues and concerns are. So usually the spirit releasement is going to be connected to a problem of some kind. And then you ask the client to close his or her eyes and to do a scan with their inner seeing or inner knowing over their physical and their auric field energy body to notice any places where there's a density or a stuckness or a fuzziness, or maybe it's a physical pain that feels disjointed from the rest of their energy system. And those are the sites to which we focus for asking the questions. So, for instance, if someone says, well, I've got this big black blob around my left knee that I dislocated when I was 10 years old, and it's been swollen and uncomfortable ever since, but there's this big black blob there. So I would say, okay, focus on the blob. And if the blob could say something, what would it want to say? And that usually just starts the dialogue process. So then we have a conversation. Now, even if someone is having a fantasy and making it up,
Mm.
it's still energy. They still experience it's still a value, just like a dream would be a value. So it can be worked with like a metaphor. You don't have to believe that it's a spirit to have an energetic release. So it's not that we're trying to prove anything with this. We're trying to support healing for the client in whatever way it wants to come through. So we're not having an argument about whether there's a spirit there or not. We're just working with whatever the client brings up. That's the grist for the mill. We're going to work with what shows up without judgment, without
Mhm.
criticizing or evaluating, just going with what comes up and following it in a logical way to a closure.
That's that dance.
Yeah. I wonder, Holly, what wisdom can you share with the audience for anybody who's experiencing spiritual or mystical experiences? Like the idea you were saying that some people feel like they're going crazy. Like, what advice would you give, or what wisdom, rather, could you share with people having these experiences that would support them in their
Well,
awakening?
the first thing would be to talk to someone about the experience, someone that would understand.
Yeah.
So look for someone who's more psycho-spiritually oriented as a practitioner or as a counselor or maybe even as a minister, um, that won't judge you. You
Yeah.
know, there are some spiritual traditions that would be very judgmental about you doing a spirit releasement
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
doing a past life if something's coming up for you spontaneously. So find someone who's non-judgmental, that you feel safe sharing with, and talk about what your struggle is. What's causing you disruption about this experience? What are the hard parts of it, and what are the blessings? How has this experience changed you in good ways?
Yeah.
And so you can balance out that there's something good and something maybe problematic happening here, and then find ways to support the energy system, grounding, healthy food, get off the daily pot usage maybe, which could exacerbate. I mean, there's all kinds of choices that people can make that are very practical that will help people become more settled in the experience and less triggered. So you want to soothe the energy system. You want to calm things down so that that's not overwhelming or taking you on a journey that you don't want to go on, with like
Yeah.
forcing you. So that kind of thing is important, and normalizing it to help the person realize that this is a normal evolutionary process, and give them resources. There are many books out there on spiritual emergence, and I would highly recommend books by Stan Groff. And there's another woman, think of her name right now, but her books on spiritual emergence, if you just put spiritual emergence in Amazon, all the books will come up.
Yeah.
Anyway, spiritual emergence, spiritual emergency, there's all kinds of books. And certainly if you go on the Spiritual Emergence Network website, they'll have lists of books there too.
Great resource.
Well, I feel like, it was just the right time for me when I came to HCH because, not ever always having had my experiences kind of suppressed or told, to keep it under wraps, don't talk about it, all of those things. I think that was the coming home feeling part for me was I felt like, wow, these really are they really are happening, which I knew they were, but it wasn't some sort of psychosis or, it was something that I finally had a safe place to share what was really going on. And then I had words to identify what was going on and then I had resources that were provided. So from, just from my heart, I just want to personally say thank you because it allowed me to really begin to understand my own emergence.
Mhm.
Yeah, And
And learning the skills of doing this work as a practitioner is so important because your clients are going to be put into emergency experiences by some of these tools. No, therapy helps people move into a spiritual emergence. So we've got to be prepared to understand that and to
yeah,
help somebody navigate through that new territory. Yeah.
it's incredible work that you're doing. And yeah,
Well, I'm in awe of it, and I'm in gratitude every day for it because I literally experience a state of grace with people in an ongoing way that is so exquisite and so affirming of life and giving me certainly a sense of purpose this lifetime.
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
Beautiful.
it is beautiful.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, so you've provided a little bit of information on how our guests might get a hold of you at the HCH Institute. Is there anything else that you wanted to share?
Well, I'd like to also talk about the board of directors experience that both Susan and I are sharing with an international organization on past life therapy. It's called the International Board of Regression Therapy, IBRT. And this is an organization that is specifically for regression therapy and many of the related modalities to regression therapy, like inner child work, spirit releasement,
Mm.
ancestral healing, all of those realms of therapy. It's a group of practitioners who have become board certified through our organization. We have a certification process that's pretty rigorous that shows that people are qualifying to have ethical and competent practices. And we also have a part of the organization is open to the public of people who are just interested in the field. Those are the affiliate members. And any of our accredited trainings in regression therapists, I think we've got 7 or 8 international schools, and mine included. When there are students attending these schools, they are student members of this organization. And the purpose of the organization is to promote the field of regression therapy and to make sure that people are using ethical and well-trained skills, but also to educate the public. And we do have some services that are open to the public, and I'd like to invite our listeners to check these out. We have a monthly gathering of a webinar. This last month, we had a presentation on working with people with disabilities doing regression therapy. And we have one coming up this month on a Saturday by one of our Turkish members from Turkey, who's doing a presentation on research that she's done on women with menstrual issues and how the menstrual problems are related to past lives. So there are lots of very interesting presentations. For a member, it's free. If you are a guest, it's $20, and you're welcome to join us if you're interested in any of those. And we also, for those practitioners who are part of our organization, we have a mentoring support group once a month. And what else do we have going on, Susan?
I think that's it.
Yeah.
That's
But
a lot,
you
actually.
don't have to be
That's
a
a lot.
past life regression practitioner to join. You can be an affiliate just because you're interested in the field and you can learn about what the work is and be educated and be part of a wonderful community of practitioners. So I happen to be the president of that now. I was one of the founding members in the late 90s, and I've been, working very closely through the organization behind the scenes in my little home office, doing all the emails and renewals of registrations and all that. But now that we've got a whole group of people that are very active and involved on our board, we've got a lot of wonderful things that we're doing that go way beyond just certifying people.
Mhm.
And we produced a book last year. It's a book called What's a Past Life Got to Do with It? And I am one of 15 authors. These are authors that are all board certified with our organization that do regression therapy. It's on audio and it's a PDF as well, or you can buy the book. So go on Amazon and check it out. It's a fascinating book about people's experiences doing regression therapy as practitioners, but also from clients' perspectives and how it works.
Amazing. Amazing.
And my other book, if anybody's interested, is called Spiritual Hypnotherapy Scripts for Body, Mind, and Spirit. And that is for practitioners or for people who want to become practitioners. And it has scripts for all kinds of presenting issues as a starting jump off point to learn how to do hypnotherapy.
It's a beautiful book.
Yeah, that's a great book. Yeah, we'll go ahead and provide links for those in the description below. And gosh, Holly, it's always such a pleasure. I could listen to you all day long. Thank you so much for the beautiful light that you bring into the world. And gosh, for all the work that you do to raise the consciousness of humanity. I mean, you are just, and you've been doing this for decades. It's just, it's beautiful. Thank you.
But believe
Thank
me,
you.
it's my joy. I'm the one who
Yeah.
gets to have the joy.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, it's our joy as well. Thank you for stepping into this space with us. And until we gather again, stay curious, stay grounded, and honor what you know beyond words.
Mm.